When we speak of identity or identity crisis, I think it will be doing injustice if we said to ourselves or we try to convince ourselves that this only has to do with the youth. And I want to repeat this one more time, that when I think the Somali community, what's unique about the Somali community, well, besides putting aside the chicken soha, that's something on the side. But what sets the Somali community apart is that when they see a white speaker, they immediately think it's for the little 7 or 8 year olds. That's not right. I think oftentimes they see the white person or the white khatib or da'i as a motivational speaker. He knows a few things here and there about Islam, and he can't really talk to us or address us elderly folks. I'm sure it's for the 5 or 10 year olds. I urge all of you to, if you do have this idea, is to try to change this idea, because that's wrong. It's very wrong. So moving from that is we're talking about gender. Why am I stuck on gender? Because this is a problem today in our society too. You know, the whole idea of gender equality, gender justice. Well, how come you guys can do it and we can't? That's kind of what I've been focusing on for the past few days. So maybe that's why I keep repeating the word gender, right? But what we do want to talk about this evening, it has to do with the identity crisis. And how, tonight will be the last night. So I spoke about the idea of having the sheeple mentality, following the herd, and so forth. And tonight we will try to reach certain conclusions or solutions on how we can avoid falling into the traps of culture and things that oppose or go against Islam. When we think about this concept of the identity crisis in America today, subhanAllah, we as Muslims it's hitting us left, right, and center. Sometimes by non-Muslims and sometimes by our very own Muslims. Right home, literally in our own community. And I think it's very, very obvious when you look close and you observe, or when you look from a distance and you look far away, you will see that we're being hit center, right, and left from all directions. SubhanAllah, you find that at the very dawn of Islam, and I think this is probably the best approach to approach this issue, and when we're speaking about the identity crisis, is we spoke, I think it was either last night or 2 nights ago, and we talked about how Islam doesn't necessarily take everything that a society has to offer, but it doesn't go to the extreme whereby it completely rejects everything that a society has to offer. So in other words, Islam is taught to take the good in any society, but it's also taught to leave the bad in any society. So it's not a full-fledged in system, but it's not a full-fledged out system either. And you find that at the very, very dawn of Islam, this is literally what Islam came to do when it came to Bedouin Arabs in the Arabian Peninsula. You find that Islam or the Sharia or Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala accepted certain things that the Arabs, the Jahilis had. And of course, Islam did come and made some corrections, but it's not either or. You find that, subhanAllah, certain qualities that you found in the Arabs or the Jahili Arabs were many things, but just to count a few, and this is not meant to be an exhaustive list by far, but there are a few things that the Arabs, the Jahili Arabs, were really, they prided themselves on. A few of these things was sidq, they were truthful. Al-wafa, they were very, very loyal. Al-ghayra, they were very, I don't want to, the word ghayra, when you translate it into English, it's usually understood as jealousy. But jealousy in the English context or in the Occident context, it can mean that you're insecure. So that's why I don't like translating the word ghayra as jealous, because jealous rubs you off as being a person who's insecure. So I think the proper definition for the word ghayra will be having jealousy in a genuine zeal or concern for a person. I think that would be the more appropriate way of defining the word ghayra. So we find that they had ghayra, they had they also had sidq, they had these very beautiful things that they lived and adhered by. So much, they had also courage. The Arabs, they weren't cowards. And that's how they were able to, the Prophet ﷺ, that's how, if you will, the Prophet ﷺ had along with him his companions, and it's by that courage that they defended the opposition and they helped protect the Prophet ﷺ from the opposition. So you find so much so that they prided themselves on generosity and being generous with their guests. You find that they themselves, Hatim al-Ta'i one time told his wife, he said, I don't want to be seen alone while I'm having dinner, so make sure that when you cook dinner for me, that you invite guests from all over the town. Good and kind and hospitable to their guests, that he was afraid that someone of his community would walk by and see him eating alone, and then they would literally accuse him of being bakhil. They would accuse him of being miserly or someone who's stingy. He was so much afraid of that he did not want to be seen eating alone. Very different from our culture today. You even see that the battles, subhanAllah, they were so courageous, and of course courage has two extremes. They were courageous and they took that to extremes that their wars and battles would last for years on end. The Arab. And of course Islam came and halted that. It put its brakes on that. So you find many of these concepts Islam agrees with. And that's why you find an intriguing ayah that a lot of us recite, but we might not pay too much attention to. We just kind of, it flies over our heads. You know where the Prophet ﷺ, he says, إِنَّمَا بُعِثْتُ لِأُتَمِّمَ مَكَارِمَ الْأَخْلَاقِ. It's a hadith. I was sent to perfect human character. Now notice how the Prophet ﷺ he didn't say that. A new ethical strategy. He says, I was sent to perfect. Meaning that the Arabs that he was sent to, they already had, a certain conduct that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala approves of, such as generosity, courage, being kind, being loyal, being good to the neighbor, and so forth. These were good constructs that the Arabs of the Jahiliyyah had. So Islam comes and says, there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. The second concept is where Islam comes and says, these are things that have to change immediately and Islam cannot accept. Such as all of you know the story where the Prophet ﷺ, he had his son, Zayd ibn Haritha, he adopted him. He was even so much so that he was called Zayd ibn Muhammad, Zayd the son of Muhammad. But Islam came and said there's no such thing as adoption in Islam. There's what's called not adoption per se, but you can foster the kids, but you cannot adopt them whereby they take your last name. So Islam came and says, no, that in itself is not permissible. There are certain things that Islam is for and certain things that Islam is against. How does this apply to us today? This means that we Muslims, wherever we set foot on, whatever land it is, we have to take the good in that society and we have to leave the bad. You have people who go to extremes and they think that they cannot take anything so long as it's from a non-Muslim society. They believe that's extreme and they can't take nothing good from them. Even though there is good, they feel like they can't take anything good from them, simply because it's from the non-Muslims. And you have the other extreme that wants to take everything from the non-Muslims without exception, simply because it's dominant and popular and it's widely accepted and widely spread. They will take it and they will go after it. Now these are all extremes. Islam comes and says what? No, we take the middle path. There are certain things that we can take, embrace, and adopt in a society, but there are also certain things that we have to completely reject and leave behind because they defy everything that Islam stands for. And that's another, I think, idea of wasatiyya in Islam, is that Islam always finds itself in the middle path. Again, it doesn't go full-fledged in, but it doesn't leave itself full-fledged out. The other thing is you find at the very top of the identity crisis is the deen itself. Is the deen. And that's why I recited from Surah Al-Baqarah today, where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He talks about the wasiyah that Ibrahim gave to his children. He says, وَوَصَّى بِهَا إِبْرَاهِيمُ بَنِيهِ وَيَعْقُوبُ. Ibrahim, he left a wasiyah for his children, and Ya'qub, Jacob also did the same. إِنَّ اللَّهَ اصْطَفَى لَكُمُ الدِّينَ. Allah has purified this religion for you, so do not die only in the state of Islam. Do not die only, but as a Muslim. Allah is most concerned, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is mostly concerned with you not dying as a millionaire, not dying as a business owner, not dying broke, not dying with riches, not dying with a high position. Allah's most concern for him is that you die in the state of Islam. And even at khutbah al-Jumu'ah, you find that the khatib almost at every khutbah is saying, "O you who believe, fear Allah the way He should be feared and do not die except in the state of Islam." So at the very top of the list when we speak of identity, because the identity in itself, it has many components. It has religious, ethical components, religious components, theological components, and also cultural components. But at the very top of the list, these are things that have to do with Islam itself, with the religion itself. And that's why you find that this element here in the religion, it's stressed time and time again, is to not only die, but in the state of Islam. So at the very top of the list, when we speak of identity, we're speaking of what? We're speaking of Islam in itself. Now earlier when I mentioned you have people inside of Islam who want to adopt everything in the culture and they don't really have any mechanism or framework that they stay within, so they have no boundaries. And this is very, very scary because this is what some of our Muslim brothers and sisters do today. They adopt everything of the American culture without any exceptions. And that's why you find the first way of leaving Islam is you think that you're going to adopt a worldview only to find out that worldview that these people are adopting completely goes against Islam. So what they do is after adopting this worldview, they look back at the prophetic tradition and they look back at the Quran and they want to interpret the Quran and the prophetic tradition through their new worldview. And that's not the way things are done. This is not the healthy approach. And this is what some of them are doing. So if they can't find a sense of harmonization between their worldview and the texts that are found in the Quran and also in the prophetic tradition, step number 2 is they dismiss them. Meaning that, and I know I'm being very vague and broad here, but what the next step is that if they can't harmonize and find a viable interpretation that suits their new worldview as Muslims, quote unquote, what they do then is they now start dismissing certain texts. And they say, oh, no, the Prophet would never say such a thing. And I'll give you maybe an example to clarify things a bit better. You know, some non-Muslims, they grew up around pets and dogs in the house. All of us know in Islam that's not permissible. You can have like a dog outside to safeguard the house, or maybe for the sheep and so forth. But to have a dog inside the house, living with you, eating with you, and laying on your couch in Islam, that's not permissible. So you'll have a Muslim, a new revert brother or sister, they'll come across this hadith, they're dissatisfied with it, even though it's authentic and all the scholars agreed on its authenticity, they will immediately look at this hadith and say, no, I don't think the Prophet would ever say such a thing. So that's step number 2. If they cannot harmonize between the texts, the second step, which is getting closer to leaving Islam, is they'll say, no, the Prophet would never say such a thing. Or when you find other texts that have to do with gender, I don't want to say equality, because Islam does not acknowledge gender equality. Islam acknowledges something called gender justice. And I know this is very different than what you've been taught maybe, that some people, they're out there and they're like, Islam is all about gender equality. It's not. Islam acknowledges and accepts a concept called gender justice. So you'll have some sisters who are very fond of feminism, and they think that Islam is all about, let's say, equal rights with men. And we tell them that if you adopt this process or this paradigm or phenomena, if you do that, you're going to have a very, very hard time looking back at the prophetic tradition and also the Quran. Because a feminist looking at the Quran or looking at the prophetic tradition will probably reject it wholeheartedly and find it to be a patriarchal system and completely dismiss it and come to the conclusion and say, this religion is not for me. So what the feminists, what they do is they adopt this idea, and then if they cannot interpret the prophetic tradition or the Quran, they will immediately go back and say, what? Oh, you know what? This is not of the religion. If they after these 2 steps, do you know what they do later on? They end up leaving the fold of Islam. And this is a problem. So the first step is they adopt a different worldview that's not predicated on the Quran, wa Sunnah, and Ijma' al-Sahaba. So the predicated worldview that's different than that. Later on, they look back at the texts and they try to harmonize the texts, not based on the Quran and Sunnah, but based on their new ideology and based on this new paradigm. But if they cannot harmonize with these texts, they go into the second stage, which is just eliminating it, period. In other words, you might have a Prophet ﷺ saying certain hadith that people might find bizarre today. Certain hadith that are found in Bukhari, Muslim, and even other books, fil kutub al-sitta, and they will come today, and the average Muslim that can't recite Surah Al-Fatiha correctly will just come out of the blue and say, the Prophet won't say this hadith. I'm sure this is just a fabrication. That's scary. Ask me, because I see this online all the time. Shafari? Oh, you look different. I'm sorry. I thought you're Abdurrahman Kari without the glasses. Okay. What's your name? Salih. Aslahakallah, Youssef. Pleasure meeting you. I'm sorry. You look like Abdurrahman Kari. I thought you were him without the glasses. All right. So I just want to say that people go through stages. And of course, if they get to a stage where they get disgusted by these texts, because the way they're viewing them is not the way a Muslim views these texts. So now they get to the stage where they're disgusted by these texts. And what's the last decision for them? The last door for them is they simply leave Islam. And we see people today, they start off as, they go after what they call equal rights with men. And then it moves on, and then they literally move on to the second stage where now they hate men completely and wholeheartedly, right? Like a feminist once said, she said, our objective as feminists is to lower the man's population to only 10%. What a noble goal, right? What a noble aspiration, right? Her objective and her goal is to lower the male population by 10%. I don't know how she's going to do that, but it shows you that it starts off as something innocent, but later on it leads to something very, very tragic and very, very scary. And subhanAllah, I'll be very frank with you. I met two brothers in Minneapolis. They got married in the same year, and both of them got divorced the same year, left with kids. And when I asked why, they said, brother, this feminism thing, this wave of feminism is too strong. We couldn't put up with it. So we have to, honestly, as Muslims, we have to acknowledge these realities. Again, it's popular, it's widespread, but does it go along with Islam or does it go against Islam? I think this is the question that all of us should ask one another. So, going back to the Prophet ﷺ and how he dealt with culture. Now, Islam, when it came, it didn't tell the pagan Arabs that they have to dress a certain way. Right? The pagan Arabs, they didn't have to dress a certain way. As a matter of fact, Abu Jahl and Abu Lahab and the big disbelievers, they actually dressed the same way the Prophet ﷺ used to. And I'll even take it a step further. This in itself is not necessarily sunnah. I want to reiterate that one more time. This in itself is not necessarily sunnah. People think that the Prophet ﷺ was wearing this. The Prophet ﷺ was wearing an izar. He was wearing two garments, right? But not what we would know today as a qamis. Even some of the non-Muslims, they would also wear the turban. Some scholars say wearing the turban in itself is not even a sunnah. But Islam doesn't necessarily come as this predatory religion to take over other people's, ways and practices, so long as it doesn't go against the fundamental teachings of Islam. Now the Prophet ﷺ, which leads me also to another point, that the Prophet ﷺ did not come with the intention of causing war and distress and grief to the people he was living with, to his own community. And I want to touch upon this, even though it might not have too much to do with the topic, but I want to touch on this so you guys have more clarity regarding the subject. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, when he talks about Prophet Muhammad, how long was he in Mecca for? The Prophet ﷺ was in Mecca for 13 years. Did he engage in any warlike activities with anybody? Did he engage in any type of battle with anybody? Not at all. It is only after 13 years when the Muslims signed a treaty in Sulh al-Hudaybiyah with the non-Muslims. And subhanAllah, if you were to read the conditions were so unjust and they were totally against the Muslims, but the Prophet ﷺ, just to keep the peace, the Prophet ﷺ accepted all of the conditions in what's called Sulh al-Hudaybiyah, and they agreed on a truce for 10 years. When Quraysh broke this truce, the Prophet ﷺ that's when he embarked on war. But the Prophet got nothing but opposition from his very own family members from day one. When he started proclaiming his faith, the only thing he got from his people, generally speaking, those around him, was nothing but opposition, was nothing but fear, was nothing but terror, was nothing but great hostility. Yet the Prophet didn't fight back for 13 years. Not because he was a coward, but because he chose peace over what? Because he chose peace over war. So why the Prophet ﷺ remained that way is not because he didn't have the way of defending himself, but he chose peace over war. But what do you do when someone is opposing you? Not one time, not twice, but when someone is showing you hostility, not day after day, not month after month, not year after year for a consecutive 13 years, what do you inevitably do at the end? You fight back. And that's normal, is you fight back. And that's why Allah says in Surah At-Tawbah, He says, أَلَا تُقَاتِلُونَ قَوْمًا نَكَثُوا أَيْمَانَهُمْ وَهَمُّوا بِإِخْرَاجِ الرَّسُولِ وَهُمْ بَدَأُوكُمْ أَوَّلَ مَرَّةٍ أَتَخْشَوْنَهُمْ. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He says, will you not fight a people who breached their contract or breached their oath? Number one. The second thing they did, وَهَمُّوا بِإِخْرَاجِ الرَّسُولِ. The second thing they did on the list is that they drove the Prophet ﷺ out of his home from Mecca to Medina. And the third one is وَهَمُّوا بِإِخْرَاجِ الرَّسُولِ وَهُمْ بَدَأُوكُمْ أَوَّلَ مَرَّةٍ. The last and third thing is, and they started you first, O Muhammad. And they started you first, O Muhammad. So three things. It's as if Allah is telling His Prophet why things are taking this curve right now. Will you not fight a people? Will you not fight a people first that breached their contract and breached their oath between both of you, which is in Sulh al-Hudaybiyah. Second is, they drove the Prophet out of his home. Third is, they started you first. In other words, the hostility did not come from the Muslims. Because the Muslims, the only thing the Muslims were looking for in Mecca was what? They were looking for a safe haven to freely worship Allah the way Allah legislated for them. This is all the Muslims at the very outset of Islam. This is the only thing the Muslims were wishing for. It's for them to come out in the public arena or the public sphere and to worship freely the way Allah legislated for them to worship. This is the only thing they were looking for at the end. Of course, later on things changed. But who started the altercation to begin with? It wasn't the Muslims. It was the non-Muslims who started the altercation to begin with. I just wanted to open up that bracket because the Prophet ﷺ is depicted by non-Muslims. And subhanAllah, you have sometimes questions by Muslims themselves and they'll say, Shaykh, did the Prophet really do this and this in this battle? But the reason why they ask that is because they're kind of held in the corner. Well, if the Prophet ﷺ is all about love, peace, and tolerance, how can he do these kinds of things in war? We have to understand that the Prophet ﷺ wasn't this warlike mongerer, he wasn't this bellicose figure, but he also wasn't the coward. He wasn't the coward, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. We don't want to look at Prophet Muhammad the way Christians look at Jesus. The way Christians look at Jesus is if he'll never hurt a butterfly. Oh, he's the Prince of Peace, he'll never hurt a butterfly. We don't look at Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam like that. Because they look at the way they betray Jesus is that he's weak and feeble. And that's not a manly characteristic to have. And then, of course, this is the way they look at him. And we kind of start looking at Prophet Muhammad that way as well, because we see our, Christian friends and neighbors looking at Jesus that way as well. So Muslims, when they hear certain things in the seerah, they get surprised and they're in, Sheikh, did the Prophet really do X, Y, Z in this ghazwa? Did the Prophet really do this and this and that? I mean, did he really do that? Why? Because their worldview, again, is that the Prophet ﷺ is all about love and tolerance to the point where it depicts the Prophet ﷺ as a coward. Of course, and he's very far from that. So the point that I'm trying to get here is that we have to be very, very careful as Muslims. Before adopting a worldview, before adopting a slogan, we have to first ask, okay, does this go along with Islam? Is it harmonious with Islam? Or is this something that Islam is not necessarily too fond of? And we talked 2 nights ago when we talked about when the culture is dominant, usually it's the dominant culture that has the followers. And that's why we as Muslims today, generally speaking, we're following the non-Muslims and we don't see the non-Muslims following us. And rightfully so. Let's be honest, rightfully so. But let me engage this audience here. Can we take certain things that we find in America? Are there certain things that we can adopt, certain things that we can learn from, and certain things that we can inculcate in our day in and day out lives? Can we? A lot. But that's the smart Muslim. The ideal, the smart Muslim, the rational Muslim is a person who takes the good and he leaves the bad. He takes the good and he leaves the bad. Now Ibrahim alayhi salatu wasalam, he also says something important. He says, قُلْ إِنَّ صَلَاتِي وَنُسُكِي وَمَحْيَايَ وَمَمَاتِي لِلَّهِ رَبِّ الْعَالَمِينَ. Say my salat, which is my prayer, وَنُسُكِي, my sacrifice, وَمَحْيَايَ, my life, and my death are all for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. This means that, is there such an idea as separation of church and state under the Islamic model? Is everything for Allah, or are there certain things that are for Caesar and certain things that are for God? Are you with us? Want a pillow? Have a coffee? Tea? Let us know. We'll get it through, inshallah. You're our guest. Wife's giving you a hard time? Yeah? I know how his wives are. Okay, I'm just giving you a hard time. I'm never coming to this guy's lecture again, right? It's okay to joke, by the way. The sunnah, it's permissible to joke around, so long as it's halal. Right? Some people think that as a sheikh or as a public speaker, you have to be serious with the people, you have to look them dead in the eye, and not necessarily. So that's permissible, inshallah, right? So, going back where the Prophet ﷺ, how he dealt with his people, subhanAllah, we're in a very, very tricky situation. So we talked about how some Muslims themselves, they take these ideas step by step until they find themselves completely out of Islam. They're disgusted by Islam because it doesn't fit with their narrative or it doesn't fit with their worldview. You have the non-Muslims, not all of them, but you have some non-Muslims as well, who will come and they have a problem with their religion because it doesn't fit with their daily practices and customs. So they look at you like you're weird and like you're backward and so forth. But history shows otherwise. There are certain crimes today that are committed in America that once upon a time in colonial America, they were considered capital punishment. If you were to commit zina in America, in colonial America, if you committed zina, you were literally brought out in public, you were shamed and whipped, and if not, you had to pay a monetary fine. Once upon a time, zina was considered a crime in America. Can you imagine that? Today, if you don't commit zina, you're considered weird. Why do we go from this extreme to this extreme? Why is it that something that was treated as a crime, so much so that you were brought in public, you were shamed in front of the people, to the point today where if you don't engage in sexual activity outside of marriage, you're looked down as weird, primitive, archaic. Where did you come from? You don't have a boyfriend? What? And then they feel sorry for you. Like when you're in high school, they feel sorry for you because you can't have a boyfriend or have a girlfriend. But once upon a time, this was looked at as a moral crime. Now, who changed the course? Right, like George Bush says, right, we have to stay the course. Who changed the course? Is it Muslims or non-Muslims? Who changed the course, Muslims or non-Muslims? So should we duck down and be ashamed that we stayed the course? Or should we be proud and look at ourselves like, you know what, no, we're happy with that. Islam says that this is not permissible. It really depends on how you look at a lot of these things. But here's another trick as well, is that we can't dance to their tunes. We can't dance to their tunes. Because something that's legal today might be illegal tomorrow. Marijuana, here in Washington, it's legal, right? Okay, so what do? Do we take all the people that were in jail? Do we take them now and do we emancipate them? Because once upon a time, to smoke weed and to sell weed was considered a crime. So now, since it's legal, do we go back to those prisons and take all of them out because the government made a silly mistake? Do you see the problem when things keep changing day in and day out? There's no consistency. And that's why we Muslims, we have to be very, very careful, because we have one measuring stick that we've been measuring with for so long, and that measuring stick is not going to change. And that's why in Islam you have two concepts. You have thawabit and you have taghayyurat. The thawabit are things that will not change. And this is more, it has to do more with the field or the aspect of morality. You have certain things that can change depending on the context, the milieu, or the place that you live in, that have to do more with cultural aspect. And I'll engage two of them. And I'll give you examples again so you can get a better idea. When we're talking about thawabit, zina will never be permissible in Islam. Zina will never be permissible in Islam. Changing your gender to another gender will never be permissible in Islam. It was never permissible in Islam. Having relations with the same gender outside of marriage is obviously a no-no. Inside of marriage is also a no-no. In other words, the LGBT idea is something that Islam says, in Islam, you can do what you want in America. Your rights are guaranteed. But under Islam, that is not permissible. Scholars have agreed upon these things for the last 15 consecutive centuries. Where in the hijab, it's not cultural. You might go on the news today and you might find some quote-unquote Muslim expert out of some college somewhere that comes on and says, yeah, hijab is nothing but cultural, it's not rooted in Islam. And we say, where do you get this sloppy verdict from? Muslims agree that hijab is mandatory upon the woman since the dawn of Islam. How do you come today and you overlook 15 consecutive centuries of scholarship and you say, oh, no, all of you women are exaggerating. Hijab, it's not mandatory. It's just cultural. It's not really in the Quran. How do you do that? How do you see that? We Muslims as well, we have to look at the implications of what we say. When I say that hijab is just cultural, or that I heard the recent argument about the same gender relationships, this man came on TV and he said, no, what's not permissible in Islam is that a man coerces another man into having these relations. But if it's permissible and consensual, Islam doesn't frown upon that. This is the latest argument I've heard from someone. And guess what? Today, I might be, I might be put on the do not call or do not invite list for certain MSAs. Why? Because speaking about these issues that I just spoke about right now, these are controversial issues. Like, you're not going to go to big conferences and find speakers talking about these things that a lot of our youth are in dire need of. But they're not going to speak about. Why? Because it's not cool to speak about these things. It's not okay. People don't want to hear these things. Or even certain MSAs, they won't invite you to their MSA college on campus because you're talking about these things. Because Muslims, your own brothers and sisters, are going to look at you, and they're going to look at you as if you're extreme. As if you're on the fringe. Like, why is he talking about them like that? That's not nice. And then they'll even accuse you and say, that's not of Islam. I mean, do we as Muslims have the right to say it's not appropriate, it's not correct to live this way? Can it just be a preference? Can I just say, I don't like this bottle, I prefer a bigger bottle? Like, do we have that right as Muslims? If you don't like it when I say it's immoral for you to engage in such activity, okay, would you feel better if I told you, I prefer not doing that? Like, do you feel better by me wording it like that? If you don't like it when I say it's immoral for this activity to be happening, or for this activity to be going on, do you feel better if I just looked at you and said, you know what, I prefer not to engage in such activity? Like, will that be taken better? Can you embrace it better like that? That's kind of what we're dealing with today. But in the past, were these things controversial? It was never controversial in the Muslim Ummah to speak about things such as hijab. It was never controversial in the Muslim Ummah to talk about things such as the LGBT community. It was never controversial in Islam to talk that, you know what, Jews and Christians, they're not believers. Yes, they're people of the book, but they're not believers. But because they're not believers, does that mean now it's an open door to show them hostility and animosity? No. But guess what? They call us disbelievers in their church. What does the word disbeliever mean? The word disbeliever is two words. Dis is a prefix for to gain in something, and believer is someone who doesn't believe in your cause or faith. We don't believe Jesus died for our sins. What does that make us? Disbelievers in their eyes. Because you're only deemed a believer in Christianity if what? You're only a believer in Christianity if you believe that Jesus died for your sins. Do we believe Jesus died for our sins? No. When you bring up these topics today, your own Muslim brothers and sisters look at you like you just dropped from Mars or Neptune. But once upon a time in the Muslim Ummah, it was never controversial. Like, Muslim speakers didn't have to hold their breath back or say, before, preparing a khutbah, I know the sisters are not going to like this, but should I use it? Should I not? Okay, but if I use it, maybe I should say it like in a joking way so the sisters don't take it to heart. Do you know, can I share with you? This is what Muslim speakers around the nation are doing today. We have to think 20 times before mentioning a hadith. And you have to ask yourself, okay, is it of wisdom or is it not? But are these sisters, are they ready to take this? The youth, are they ready for this hadith? Should I mention this ayah? It's like we have to bite our tongues literally 20,000 times before giving a speech because we know it's not going to be received very well by our own Muslim brothers and sisters. And this is a problem. Why? Because we've adopted different worldviews today that are alien to the worldviews of Islam. And that's the problem. When you can't decipher nor distinguish between what is good and what is bad, you're going to have a hard time and you're going to embrace everything that society throws your way. Not because it's good or moral or valuable, but because it's popular and because everybody's doing it. And that's the sheeple mentality I shared with all of you last night. For those of you who were present, we talked about the sheeple mentality, and that is that, for those of you maybe who are new with us tonight, a sheeple mentality, there are two kinds. The sheeple mentality, there are those who subconsciously make decisions or judgments, and this is scary, and there are people who do it consciously, and the reason why they have or adopt the sheeple mentality consciously is because they're afraid of being different. And we're in that stage right now where we don't want to do certain things out in public because we're afraid. I don't want to wear my hijab because the average Katie or Judy or Justin is going to look at me and think that I'm extreme and oppressed. So no, I don't have to wear the hijab. The hijab is in the heart. Like, the hijab was never in the heart. The hijab was never in the heart. The hijab that Islam is talking about is the hijab that goes over your hair or your head. You see? But why these items are viewed to be controversial in the Muslim Ummah? Why? Because people are adopting this liberal worldview. And they're projecting that liberal worldview on what? They're projecting it on Islam. And that's very, very scary. That's very, very scary. So, Brothers and sisters, I'll be very frank with you. The culture is very, very strong, especially if it's a popular culture, and especially if the culture is, in itself is dominant, and it's very, very popular. It's going to be very, very difficult, not just for the young ones, but for the adults as well, to swim against the tides. It takes so much strength just to say no to the popular culture. It takes no to say, I don't want to imitate these guys. I don't want to imitate this singer. I don't want to imitate this rapper. It takes so much for you to say, no, why should I imitate them? I know who I am. I know what I stand for. And I think Abdurrahman Kariye is going to give his talk here in about 10 or 15 minutes. So I want to delve into 3 practical ways on how we can remain firm on our religion. 3 practical ways. One is the duksi. I want to talk a bit about the duksi. And some of you might disagree with me, but at least give me a chance to kind of speak my mind. Number 2 is seeking knowledge, seeking Islamic knowledge. And number 3 is dua. The number one thing that I see in the Somali community, and this is something that's praiseworthy and something that's very, very good, and that is that duksis have become literally like the McDonald's for Muslims. Every mile you go, you see a duksi, which is good. That's good. However, our approach to the duksi system, I think it can be revised to a certain degree, and that is that. Look at what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in the Quran about either understanding the Quran, or B, memorizing the Quran. What is more important in the sight of Allah? What is more important? Understanding. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, I'm not sure I can think of a verse right now where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala talks about memorizing the Quran specifically. In the 2 verses I'm familiar with, He praises understanding, but not hifz, not memorization. In one verse you find where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in Surah An-Nisa, أَفَلَا يَتَدَبَّرُونَ الْقُرْآنَ. Number 1, do they not contemplate about the Quran? Do they not reflect on the Quran? Number 2 is في Surah As-Saff, where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, or not As-Saff, excuse me, Sad, where Allah says, كِتَابٌ أَنزَلْنَاهُ إِلَيْكَ مُبَارَكٌ لِيَحْفَظُوا آيَاتِهِ لِيَدَّبَّرُوا آيَاتِهِ وَلِيَتَذَكَّرَ أُولُو الْأَلْبَابِ. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in Surah Sad, He says, a book that was revealed to you, O Muhammad, لِيَدَّبَّرُوا, so they contemplate its verses. They contemplate on its verses. They profoundly think about it in the meanings. What does this verse mean? What does it imply? What does it entail? What is Allah telling me in this verse? That's number 2. These are 2 verses that you find in the Quran where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala doesn't talk about memorizing the Quran. And you'd be surprised that many companions did not memorize the Quran. Many companions, this might be a surprise to some of you, but many scholars or many companions did not memorize the Quran. Now, I don't want someone to misunderstand what I'm trying to get at here. I am not saying that we should close the duksis and we should, have them do something better. But living in America and just having people like robots memorizing the Quran, but they don't understand the very basic meanings of the Quran or the mufradat al-Quran, just the basic words of the Quran, this is problematic. This is very problematic. Because you have certain duksis, they bring out, mashallah, a lot of hafaz, but if you were to ask the average hafiz, what does this word mean in Arabic? He probably wouldn't be able to understand. Now, I know I'm probably going to get, a dab of criticism for bringing this up, but I truly feel that there needs to be a different approach to the whole duksi system, whereby we don't just have them as memorizing robots, but they have no clue as to what it is they're reciting or what it is they're saying. So that's number 1, and that's very important, is for them to understand the meanings of the Quran, the tafsir of the Quran, and basic things in the Quran. That's just my opinion, and Allah knows best. Number 2 is seeking knowledge, seeking Islamic knowledge. SubhanAllah, I cannot think of a time where we Muslims are in need of knowledge, of sacred knowledge like we are today. Wallahi. And that's why I am absolutely against students graduate in high school and they have no understanding of Islam, and we send them and they embark on their what's called college careers. I'm against that. I'm against that because when you look at Muslims apostating and leaving Islam, when they go into college, you put 2 and 2 together, they went there, they don't have a rock solid foundation in Islam, so they go there and they take in everything. And they're met with a great deal of skepticism, and from there, what do? They start questioning Islam, and after questioning Islam, they leave Islam. And you, subhanAllah, that's why if I were to ask all of you, are you all proud of your religion? By raise of hands? You're not proud, are you? Because you're from Minnesota, right? Okay, mashallah. You can only be proud of something and value something that you know. You cannot value that which you don't know. You cannot appreciate that which you don't know. You cannot truly love that which you don't know. What we as Muslims, what we fell into is that we don't know much about Islam, but then again, we will sit there and look each other in the eye and say, brother, I'm proud to be a Muslim, I love Islam. Brother, what do you know about Islam? Not too much, but I love it. That's problematic. You can only truly value something when you know it. Can you love someone you don't know? Can you love someone you don't know? Like, what if I came to you and I said, brother, I love you? Of course, there's the mahabbah for the sake of Allah, but we're talking about love because you know the person, they're trustworthy, they're honorable, they're considerate, so on and so forth, right? You'd say what? I love this person. But what we as Muslims fell into is that, I love Islam. Brother, how much you know about Islam? Not a lot. Yeah, that's a problem. You see what's happening? And what happens is we Muslims, because we lack when it comes to sacred knowledge, is now we look inferior and we're not ready to take on serious questions either by Christians or atheists. And so we duck in the corner and we don't know how to answer these questions. And so then that's why you'll find a lot of the youth, they come to the mashayikh and they're running. Sheikh, I got a question. Did the Prophet really marry a 9-year-old? Because he's looking at today's context, today's milieu, today's time, and he looks at a 9-year-old, he's like, hold on, a 50-year-old man married my 9-year-old? What? Sheikh, there has to be a problem here. Sheikh, did the Prophet really do that, Sheikh? Or they ask certain things about the hadith tradition. Or it's okay to hit your wife in the Quran, as some would, like to allege. You have a lot of these misconceptions, and some of us Muslims, when we're confronted with them, we buckle, we duck down, we embrace inferiority complex, and we don't know how to respond. And then what do we do from there? We start questioning Islam. Man, maybe this religion is not right after all. And when we start questioning it, it's one doubt plus another doubt plus another doubt plus another doubt until that person is filled with doubts. And what does he do? He finds an open door to atheism, and he thinks that atheism now is going to adequately answer a lot of his concerns. Things don't work like that, bro. So that's why there has to be, the duksi has to be coupled with sacred knowledge. And subhanAllah, in the past, scholars in the past, they did not want to bring up misconceptions in front of the people because that would create doubt. But brothers, sisters, with YouTube, with Facebook, with social media, you can't tell me, يَخِي لَا تُثِيرُ الشُّبَهَاتِ عَلَى الْمَلَأِ. You can't say, don't bring up these misconceptions in the public sphere. They're looking at them on YouTube. They're looking at these misconceptions on Facebook. They're looking at these misconceptions almost everywhere. You can't come to me and say, brother, don't talk about these misconceptions in public. You're going to create doubt and skepticism within the hearts of the believers. Brother, they already have doubts, bro. They're already filled with doubts. So we can't act like, I know you're seeing it on Facebook and social media, and you know that you are. We're not going to talk about it. That's like the elephant in the room and we're not addressing it. We're looking at each other. We know there's an elephant in the room, but we're just looking at each other like, yeah, he's not really there, right? That's what we're doing. And that's why, subhanAllah, I hear from brothers who go to college and they call me, Sheikh, is it true that the Quran, when it was compiled, this and this and this happened? You go on YouTube and subhanAllah, we're being hit left, right, and center by Jews, Christians, and atheists about doubts about the Quran. How is the Quran compiled? People will even go to extreme and say, are we even sure that Prophet Muhammad even existed? Doubts have gotten to this level. How to counter these doubts is for us to first understand that these doubts do exist out there. They're prevalent. And do you know who's being targeted? Our youth are being targeted. Our daughters in high school are being targeted. Our sons in college are being targeted. So we can't act like this is not going on. And do you know whose responsibility this is? يَا أَيُّهَا الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا قُوا أَنفُسَكُمْ وَأَهْلِكُمْ نَارًا. Oh, men, save yourselves and your family from the hellfire. So it's the responsibility of us parents to educate our children first and for them to take this knowledge seriously. And that's why it baffles me, wallahi, it baffles me when you have parents, they call you and they're crying, they're weeping. Sheikh, please, can I get some of your time? I want you to come and try to talk with my child. He's asking questions about the existence of God. He's asking questions about Prophet Muhammad. He's asking about how the Quran was compiled. And then the father, after spending so many years, spending for his little ones, now when he needs him the most, his son now is contemplating leaving Islam. Was that productive at the end of the day? So that's why if there is a time for us to take our religion seriously, brothers and sisters, it's today. No one is asking for you to be a scholar in Islam. No one is asking for you to be a public speaker. No one is asking for you to be a khatib or an imam. But guess what? You have to have the very basics of your religion. And if you think you're immune to this, and you think it's not going to affect you, I ask you to truly reconsider and think again. Because if this is your reply or answer, this is of arrogance. A person who doesn't fear for himself, this is of arrogance. And subhanAllah, there's one thing in the Quran where the Prophet ﷺ, where Allah tells his Prophet to ask him to increase up. Do you know what it is? What is it? وَقُلْ رَبِّ زِدْنِي عِلْمًا. And say, oh Allah, increase me in knowledge. Not increase me in fashion. Not increase me in wealth. Not increase me in women, children. No. Oh Allah, increase me in knowledge. It is, subhanAllah. Can I get an empty bottle real quick? Just quickly. And I'll end. Arkani? Ahmed. Can you provide for me an empty bottle real quick? Yes. Maybe if you can gargle it down and give it to me. This wasn't part of the muhadara, but I just want to do it anyways, just because it's important. And if you're living in America and you tell me, Sheikh, I love to give da'wah, I have to ask you, how much of your time are you seriously devoted to seeking Islamic sacred knowledge? If you're telling me that you love Islam and you love to give da'wah, yet you're not prioritizing your time, and knowledge in itself is not a priority, I have to say, bro, I'm sorry. You ain't keeping it real, bro. Real talk, you're not keeping it real. If you tell me on one side that you want to call to Islam and you're not giving the sacred knowledge any of your time, you don't want to give da'wah, bro. You're not being honest. Because the first hurdle, the first stumbling block of giving da'wah is you have to have knowledge. And don't let shaitan, because shaitan will come to you immediately and say, look, you're not going to be a khatib, you're not going to be a public speaker, you're a good Muslim, you're doing okay, you just finish. No. Let these two things be in parallel with one another. Yeah, that's fine. That's all right. We can work with that.
Oh, you want a bottle?
Yeah, if there is, if not, don't worry about it. I thought you were just going to gargle it down and bring it. MashaAllah. Habidakallah. Tayyib. I want you to look at these two things. This is a Muslim, he's not a scholar, but he's got a lot of knowledge. He's doing okay, right? He's got some knowledge. This brother right here, he's so excited about just brothers and sisters, because when you say brothers, you're looked at with skepticism. Why is he only saying the brothers? Why is he leaving the sisters out? Okay, brothers and sisters, right? So this is a brother or sister, right? With some knowledge, all right? So they're not a scholar. They're not like doing halal and haram Q&A sessions. No, they got some knowledge. They know what's up. They have the basic fundamentals of Islam, enough to get them by with, right? You have this Muslim right here, Muslim or Muslimah, right? And they love Islam. They love Islam. But the Islamic information or knowledge that they have of Islam is like this. It's empty. And we're not making fun of anybody. Not at all. Now look at what's happening here. You have the non-Muslim, whether it be the atheist, the Jew, or the Christian that comes along and says, Sheikh, hey man, I have a few questions about Islam. That person is talking to this person. The non-Muslim is talking to the Aquafina, right? And this is what he's doing. He's trying to get him to leave his fundamental beliefs. So this is what's happening. Look at what's happening. I'm going to take my index finger here and I'm going to hit this as hard as I can. So look what happens. Is it going far? Is it going far? No. Okay. Look at this Muslim who's proud to be a Muslim, who loves Islam, who wants to give da'wah, but there's nothing here. So look what happens. They go so far until now they're filled with all those skepticism, all that skepticism. You guys see what just happened? Again, this is not fully full. I mean, look, here. Let's do this even more. You can be this Muslim or Muslimah. That's still good because it's half full and half empty. I don't want you to think I'm going at 75%. I'm not asking for all that. But don't be the brother or sister that's in America, no idea of what Islam is, and you want to call people to Islam, and you're proud to be. You can't be proud of something that you can't really value something that you don't truly know. Yes, we're taught that the Quran is the kalam of Allah. We're taught that the Prophet ﷺ is the best human being that ever lived and walked on the earth. They're givers, right? We know these things, but do you truly value your deen? Do you truly value your deen? So, if there's a time for us to truly accelerate and get serious when it comes to seeking sacred knowledge, this is the time. No, don't drop out of high school. Continue being the engineer you want to be. Continue being the doctor. Continue being the lawyer. But know that you have to make it. You have to fit within your busy schedule a time to understand your deen. Because you know what? Your kids are going to come to you someday, and do you know what they're going to say? After having these discussions and dialogues with their friends in college and high school, Baba, did the Prophet really exist? He's my friend in school. He said that he didn't exist, and he read this book, and he said that the trade routes didn't really go from there, and this and that. Ma'adallah. What do you do as a parent? Don't talk to that boy again. Those are bad friends. You're not going to convince your kid. When he's watching professors and philosophers and debaters and apologists talk about these things, and all you have to offer is, those are not good people, stay away from them. I'm sorry, he's not convinced. Is he going to take you seriously? Probably not. He's just not intellectually edified. Would you say that? That's all you have to give him? Stay away from those friends. He's not convinced. He's going to go look elsewhere. So don't think that it's only for the kids to seek Islamic knowledge. No, it's for the grown-ups. Let us benefit with our time. The last one is to make dua to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Because even if you're in your 40s, 50s, and you have a family, there's still the possibility where the hearts are in between the fingers of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And it's Allah who controls your heart the way He wants. So the Prophet used to make a dua. And even though he was promised Jannah, and he's the first one who will enter in paradise, you still find that the Prophet ﷺ used to make this dua a lot. He used to say, Allahumma ya muqallib al-qulub, thabbit qalbi ala ta'atik wa ala dinik. Oh, turner of hearts, make my heart firm on your deen. You know today, right now, you're probably very excited and your zeal is going through the roof to start learning about Islam and to start taking your religion seriously. Will you agree? That's because your heart right now, it's in sync with the environment it's in. The minute you leave and you put on NPR News and you start listening to the news, that hamasa, that fervor, and that zeal, it gradually starts moving away. When you get home, you open up Fox News, you start to forget. And then your kids come and hug you and you forget even more. And the next day, you find yourself in a completely different atmosphere. You were here right now, and you want to go on the internet and research, and you want to go to the sheikh, and you want to embark on these studies in fields, but tomorrow you find yourself in a completely different world. So that's why the Prophet ﷺ used to make the dua, and he would say, Allahumma ya muqallib al-qulub, thabbit qalbi ala ta'atik. Oh, changer of hearts, make my heart firm on your deen. If there's one dua that you can practice or memorize, it's got to be this dua. Allahumma ya muqallib al-qulubi thabbit qulubana ala ta'atik aw ala dinik. O changer of hearts, make our hearts firm on your religion. Allahumma ameen. SubhanAllah, I think Friday, Saturday, and Sunday, this is the subject that I talked about. Culture, popular culture, secular liberalism, things of this nature. So you Muslims have a better idea of how to move forward. No one is telling you to leave this country. Have a positive impact on the people you're living with. Don't be afraid of standing out. Don't be afraid of saying, no, this is wrong, this is against my religion. Don't be afraid of that. And if you're afraid of criticism, you know the best of those who went before us received nothing but criticism. Starting from Adam, to Noah, to Ibrahim, to Ismail, to Moses, to Jesus. If you were to look at the struggles and the difficulties that they lived through, it's unbearable. It's inconceivable. We're not facing those kind of trials and tribulations. We're not facing these kinds of difficulties. But guess what? We do have some difficulties. But it's the mercy of Allah that we're experiencing these difficulties and not like the difficulties of the Anbiya who went before. Imagine if your Imam came to you and said, offer your son as a sacrifice. Imagine if your imam came to you and said, offer your son as a sacrifice. If you want to truly show your belief, offer your son as a sacrifice. Would you be able to do that? Not at all. But do you know that Ibrahim alayhi salatu wasalam was the one and only Prophet of Allah who was asked from Allah and commanded by Allah to offer his son as a sacrifice? So Allah is not asking too much of you. Allah is not asking too much of you. So, if anything that was correct or beneficial is from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and Him alone. If anything that was incorrect is from me and shaitan. هذا والله أدرى وأعلم.